Hello, Innovation Stream friends. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. My name is Randy Bell, and I'm the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you all for joining us today for EnergySource Innovation Stream, where we highlight new energy technologies with the potential to reshape the global energy system. This is our 35th episode of Innovation Stream since March and the final episode of the year. Thank you to all of our loyal viewers. We really appreciate you tuning in every week for this program. Innovation Stream will return in February following our flagship event, the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum, which is this January 19th through 21st. We'll have Innovation Stream programming during the forum, so we hope you will all join us there. It is a virtual event, of course. More info at acenergyforum.org. Today, we will be hearing from Tim Latimer, the founder and chief executive officer of Fervo Energy, who will discuss how novel drilling techniques can scale up geothermal energy development. We think there are tremendous opportunities for expanded geothermal energy development in the US and around the world, so we wanted to close the year highlighting Fervo's exciting technology. Be on the lookout for more work on geothermal from the Global Energy Center in 2021. Okay, before we get started, we have a quick poll and 2 administrative details. So Roger, can we start the poll? So the question today is which country has the highest installed geothermal capacity? So don't go look this up on Wikipedia, take your best guess. We will close the poll after we go through my administrative details. So first, you can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy and use the hashtag InnovationStream. And then second, after Tim's presentation, you can submit questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. I'll try to get to as many of these as I can. And if you're watching on another platform like YouTube or Twitter, unfortunately, we cannot take your questions. So you have to be on Zoom to ask the questions. Okay, thank you to all who participated in the poll. Now back to the program, and please let me welcome Tim to the Atlantic Council. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So Tim, I hope you and your family are doing well. How has the pandemic impacted the geothermal sector?
It's been interesting because we actually share a lot of services and expenses with the oil and gas industry. And obviously this is the year where there's been an unprecedented downturn in the oil and gas sector, including negative prices. And so it's helped out with our industry's cost structure a lot because we bid competitively with oil and gas for the same drilling rigs and other factors. And so it's helped reduce costs, but at the same time, the demand for clean energy continues to grow. So it's been a good, been a challenging year for a whole number of reasons, but in particular, but just for the geothermal sector alone, we've had strong market demand for our product, clean electricity, while our costs have fallen. So it's actually been one of the trends that have been pushing more and more demand for geothermal and kind of this interesting resurgence that we're seeing in the sector.
That's really, really fascinating. You know, there are any number of people I talk to in the energy industry who keep telling me, watch this space in 2021. So I think we'll see a lot of opportunity. Okay, to the poll. Before we show the results, Tim, I know you know the answer to the poll, but what do you think our audience thinks the answer is?
Well, when people think geothermal, it's branding wise, it's almost synonymous with Iceland. Anybody who's visited there maybe even swam in some of the geothermal hot springs. So I'm guessing a lot of people guessed that, but Iceland also is a country of only 400,000 people. So they have a much smaller installed capacity. So the correct answer, I hope I'm right about this, is the United States. But I think people may have guessed Iceland.
Yeah, you're right that it's the United States. So the United States has about 3,600 megawatts of installed geothermal capacity. That makes up 0.4% of our total electricity sector. Now, you're right, 51% of the audience said Iceland, but coming in number two, 39% said United States. So for those in the 39% category, good guess. For those who thought Iceland, I assure you, you're in good company. Many people think that. But as Tim said, it's a country of 400,000 people. So even if they increase to 100% geothermal, they still would not come close to being in the top. It's clear there's a lot of opportunity in this space. So Tim, why don't you get started with your presentation, and it'll tell us how Fervo is going to take advantage of this opportunity.
Sounds good. Thanks, Randy. And I'll just throw one last tidbit out there about that poll question. Uh, Kenya was not an option, but actually, had you asked that question on a different basis, which what country gets the highest percentage of its electricity from geothermal, Iceland would have been the right answer until about 2 years ago when Kenya actually surpassed it and gets over 50% of its electricity now from geothermal energy. So it's kind of the world leader there. So just a extra bonus geothermal fact based on the poll today. But anyway, I'll segue into my presentation here. I'm very excited to be here. As Randy said, I'm Tim Latimer, the co-founder and CEO of Fervo Energy. I started my career in the oil and gas industry, worked as a drilling engineer for several years in the oil fields of West Texas, but got to a point fairly early in my career where I got very passionate about climate change and wanted to find a path where I could make a contribution to addressing climate change, and became very excited when I stumbled into the world of geothermal and realized that I could continue doing what I already knew how to do well, which is drill deep wells, but do it for a clean energy resource instead of one that produces more hydrocarbons. I became doubly excited when I realized that there was a huge untapped potential for geothermal, where we could get as much as 20% of US electricity from geothermal. And that's a very important number. I'll talk about that in the presentation, but you had to have new technology innovations. And I saw a lot of the very rapid innovation and technology progress that has happened in the oil and gas industry over the last decade, and saw a big opportunity for some of those to make a big impact in opening up the geothermal space. So Fervo Energy is a company I founded. After my time in the oil and gas industry, I went out to get a graduate degree at Stanford, met several people there in the geothermal research program that had been working on some of the technology innovations that are core to Fervo today, importantly, distributed fiber optic sensing and horizontal drilling, and we launched the company in 2017. We've been very fortunate to be backed so far by organizations like Breakthrough Energy Ventures from the private sector, $1 billion clean energy VC fund set up by Bill Gates and others to tackle big problems in climate change, and then the public sector side from organizations like Activate, ARPA-E, and the Geothermal Technology Office. And we are a geothermal energy developer using our new novel innovations in drilling to access geothermal in new places. And our ambition is to unlock that huge, 100 plus gigawatt clean electricity prize that geothermal represents, and help rapidly accelerate the clean energy transition. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make sure this works. And go ahead and jump into the presentation here. So just to start, geothermal energy means different things to different people, especially if you're from the Northeast. You may be familiar with what's on the left, which is residential geothermal cooling, where you heat your house or other buildings with shallow wells. There's also direct use. For example, if you swum in any of those spas in Iceland, that's an example of direct use, but people also use geothermal energy to heat greenhouses, promote agriculture, do other processing and manufacturing. Those are both promising activities, growing very well all over the world. But the focus of my presentation today is on utility scale power generation for geothermal. And just want to do this up front, because like I said, geothermal can mean different things to different people. I'm talking about deep power generation. That's the business that Fervo's in. And just kind of a geothermal 101 here, the way it works. You find hot spots in the earth that are hot because of geologic activity, either volcanic activity or faults or other activity that drives heat closer to the surface of the earth. And then you drill a series of wells, deep injection wells where you pump cold water down, and then deep production wells where hot water returns to the surface. You pump the cold water down, it sweeps across it flows through the geothermal reservoir, gets hot and returns to the surface as steam. That steam can be captured at the surface and used to power a turbine to generate clean electricity. And because you're using the natural heat of the earth and not combusting any fossil fuels, there's no emissions associated with this process. And unlike other renewables, it works 24/7. So it has a valuable place to play in the grid. There's about 3.7 gigawatts installed in the US, as you all know now, the world leader, although there's some countries hot on our heels like Kenya and Turkey and Indonesia, and about 15 gigawatts worldwide. The reason it's important is it provides 24/7 carbon-free electricity, and that kind of reliability and emissions profile is rare among resources, so it's an important prize to go after. And it has potential for very large scale. The technology and policy barriers must be overcome to meet it. And it's a good time for geothermal. There's a reason why people are calling it the space to watch for 2021. There's many trends that are moving in the right direction that are bringing people and attention back to the geothermal market. I'll get into these in a little bit, but it's new technology, new policies, in particular focus on deep decarbonization, 100% clean energy, and then new entrants that are buying clean energy directly, which provide opportunities for companies like mine to sell to customers that are very passionate about climate change. On the technology side, the story of the 2010s is one of wind, solar, and batteries. And I think a lot of people are familiar with these facts. I mean, it's just tremendous what's happened in the wind and solar sector. 85% cost decline in solar since 2010, 49% cost decline in wind energy. But the thing people may be less familiar with is the increase in drilling productivity. There's been about a 10x increase in drilling productivity over the last 10 years. So it's actually followed a technology and cost curve very similar to what's happened in the wind and solar sectors. To date, that's really led to increased drilling and record low natural gas prices. But given the overlap between the two sectors, this presents a really compelling opportunity to reduce costs in geothermal drilling. And that's what Fervo Energy is focused on. Additionally, we're in a totally different policy space than we were in the last few years. Renewable portfolio standards have been around for a long time, but up until 2 years ago, they traditionally were low-level targets. Let's get 10% or 20% or 33% of our electricity from clean sources. That really changed in 2018. Hawaii and then California with SB 100, and now several states have adopted targets to actually get to 100% clean electricity. There's now 9 states with those targets, and that getting to 100% clean electricity is a much, much different problem than getting to 33% or 25% clean electricity, because you need to actually think about how you deliver that power reliably in every hour of the year. And so solar and wind are going to carry us a long way there, but because, for example, solar can't produce at night and in the wintertime, even coupled with battery storage, it can't really fully complete those hours. We need new resources to accomplish this. And so the passing of SB 100 and these other opportunities have created a huge interest from buyers and utilities in these states to actually revisit geothermal. Unfortunately, states like Washington, Nevada, California, New Mexico, Hawaii are areas that have been leaders in setting these deep decarbonization policy targets and also have a tremendous amount of geothermal resource potential. There's a lot of overlap between the states that have strong policies and the geothermal resource. Additionally, we're seeing a bunch of private sector actors and then groups at the city level take ambitious action on clean energy and climate change. And so kind of the trajectory that groups have followed here is focusing on being carbon neutral through the use of offsets. And then other folks, first led by Google and now over 300 different corporations, have focused on 100% renewable energy, which is a great target that's catalyzed a lot of investment in the renewable space. But it's not something that tries to match the actual load to the supply. It's more of an accounting exercise of let's make sure we buy enough renewable megawatt hours a year to offset our consumption. But historically, companies haven't focused on where or when those megawatt hours are produced. It's more about adding it up on the end of the year and making sure everything cancels out. But that's also changed in 2020. Google has taken a big lead here and become the first company to set an ambition by 2030 to actually time match and location match their clean electricity generation to their actual load center. So this is going to be the first time that anything has been powered actually with 24/7 clean electricity, matched hour by hour, which is a very different thing than doing that on an accounting basis averaged over a whole year. Google, Walmart, and cities like LA have set ambitious targets for this that are actually much faster than the longer term targets that most states have set on 100% clean electricity. And that's driving a lot of customer demand for the kind of product that geothermal is selling as well. And with these more ambitious targets getting to 100%, we know we can't just build more wind and solar to get there. Those are going to be the 2 pillars of the clean electricity transition. And along with batteries, it's going to help get those to deeper and deeper levels. But dozens of studies have now come out, and this is becoming consensus now that once you get beyond 60 or 70 or 80% electricity generation from variable renewable sources, even coupled with batteries, it starts getting prohibitively expensive to decarbonize the last 10, 20, 30% of the electric grid. And we need a firm 24/7 resource like geothermal to help us get all the way there and meet these ambitious targets. And so this is turning into what buyers want in 2020, which is different than what electricity buyers have prioritized before. Buyers need something that's always on. Reliability is becoming even more important than ever. But they also need something that's carbon free. And it also needs something that plays well on the grid. It's dispatchable. It can do well with solar and the dynamic changes that are happening. It needs to be inexpensive, fast to build, or it needs to be truly scalable. And so these are what buyers are looking for to complement and diversify their portfolios beyond wind and solar. And geothermal's the thing that fits the bill. And so 2020 has been a bit of a banner year for geothermal. In the past decade, there's been very little activity in the geothermal sector. There was a lot of activity in the late 2000s in the United States, but the 2010s has not led to much growth or development. That's specific to the US, by the way. There's tremendous growth in places like Indonesia and Kenya and Turkey, like I mentioned before. But in the US context, there hasn't been much activity until 2020, when all these factors, the deep decarbonization, the technology changes, the new entrants, have led to a big uptick in market interest. And so one of the best examples of this is there's been 8 new power purchase agreements signed in 2020 alone for geothermal. In the last 3 years, there have only been 1. And so all kinds of customers, from corporations to community choice aggregators to cities and universities and utilities, are turning to geothermal. And I've put a representative quote here from Silicon Valley Clean Energy that have done a couple large geothermal projects this year. And I think Monica Padilla from that organization says it well. You know, geothermal tends to be more expensive than solar, but you have to look at the value proposition, not just cost. And as reliability and hitting these deep targets becomes more important, people are willing to revisit geothermal. It's also an exciting time from a research and development standpoint. I highlight a picture here from the Utah Forge project. This has been a project years in the making, led by the Department of Energy, focusing on new innovations in directional drilling and enhanced geothermal systems. That's actually drilling their first full-scale well right now in Utah and driving major innovation. It's the most sophisticated test lab for geothermal that's ever been created. There's also huge efforts at the state level. The California Energy Commission just created a state panel focused on doing critical minerals extraction from what they're calling the Lithium Valley, the Salton Sea in Southern California. One of the fascinating things about geothermal is you can actually mine lithium directly from the geothermal brine that comes to the surface. And as electric vehicles and batteries become more and more important, this is becoming a big co-benefit of developing more geothermal resources. And on the policy support, this is set to just continue increasing. The Agile Act, the Advanced Geothermal Innovation Leadership Act, it's part of the bill that's being debated in the Senate right now. And if it passes, it's not only going to authorize funding of up to $150 million a year for geothermal to help accelerate some of these innovations, it's also going to create groups focused on critical minerals efforts like lithium mining, and also allow demonstrations of the technologies that are developed at Forge. We're also seeing a huge interest from investors right now, and also oil and gas companies that had mostly written off geothermal previously. So on the left, you know, public sector organizations like ARPA-E and Activate and Geo, as well as private investors, venture capitalists like Breakthrough Energy Ventures and the Engine from MIT, are backing geothermal for the first time in years. And oil and gas companies are starting to make it a central part of their strategy. So every oil and gas company I've listed here has taken action in the geothermal sector in the last year, most of them new to the space, and starting to see it as a way to transition their energy resources and capabilities. There's also a lot of exciting startups in the space. I'm going to tell you all about Fervo in a second. I think, you know, selfishly, we're the most exciting startup, but I'm very excited to be part of a very energized ecosystem. And I just highlight 3 folks here that's really interesting. One is a company called Climon that's developed new organic Rankine cycle turbines that actually let us access lower temperature geothermal resources than we ever have before. So we may not even need to drill that deep in the future to get to geothermal with these new technologies. There's also promising companies like Lilac that are developing systems to directly mine lithium from geothermal, which is going to be more and more important as we think about the critical minerals needed for the energy transition. And another company also with us at Activate is Zanscar, and using techniques like passive seismic exploration to increase the certainty of finding geothermal resources. So we're starting to see a very vibrant geothermal startup ecosystem, which we're excited to be a part of. Fervo Energy, this is the only slide I have on us because I want to talk about how the exciting things happening in the sector. But we have a few innovations that are new to us that we think are going to really drive performance in geothermal. So in contrast to the slide that I showed you at the beginning, we're developing precision directional drilling technologies to actually go fully horizontal in the geothermal resource, which allows us to access far more resource per well. We estimate 4 times higher flow rates and reservoir quality for our projects than traditional geothermal, which dramatically lowers the cost and increases the predictability. We've also developed novel techniques backed by RPE on distributed fiber optic sensing, that lets us actually measure with high resolution what's happening in terms of flow and temperature change, even when it's thousands of feet below our feet in the reservoir. And we underpin all of this with advanced computational simulation methodologies that our teams developed to become way more precise with these capabilities. So we've finished our first test project over the summer at the field level. The results were extremely promising in terms of the technologies we were deploying in geothermal for the first time. And we have multiple projects in construction today across the Western US using our technologies. This approach, combined with the other promising technology that I've talked about, can unlock the 120 gigawatt prize that's outlined in the DOE's GeoVision study that was released last year. And that's a very important number because 120 gigawatts gets you to around 20% of US electricity. So if you think about that chart I showed you before, where getting beyond 80% decarbonization with just wind, solar, and batteries was going to be challenging, if we could truly realize this prize, a 100% clean electricity system with 20% of that electricity coming from geothermal is completely realistic and a goal we can achieve quite rapidly. And so this is why I'm bullish on geothermal. I think the 2020s will be the decade of geothermal, but we have to seize the moment. There's concrete actions that we need to take to make this happen. First, we need to provide policy support. Historically, geothermal hasn't gotten the same tax credits that wind and solar have, and it's been hit or miss or spotty support. So we have to provide that kind of support for the industry to actually be able to be on a level playing field with other renewables and really take off. Additionally, we don't have the same categorical exclusions and permitting exemptions that the oil and gas industry has. You know, being somebody from the oil and gas industry, I can tell you, if you go out and permit a well for oil and gas, if you permit a well, drilling a well and call it for oil and gas, it's actually way, way easier to get that permit than it is if I just call it for geothermal. It could be the same well construction, same equipment, but just calling it a different resource puts it into a different permitting category that's much more lengthy than what the oil and gas industry does. We need to tell our story. That's why I'm excited to be speaking at this panel today. Most people don't know about geothermal and the fact that there are new technologies in the space and that it is exciting. And the reason we don't get policy support and the reason a lot of customers don't know about this and aren't asking for more geothermal is because there's a lack of awareness. We really need to get our story out there more. And finally, we have to, as an industry, drive technologies that customers want. We have to work on our consistency. We have to work on our flexibility. Dispatchability and the ability to play nice on the grid is becoming more and more important. Geothermal can do that, but people need to know about it more. And we need to develop better technologies to be responsive to a dynamic and changing grid. And then we need to commercialize these promising technologies on mineral extraction. We're not only getting clean electricity and clean heat, but we're also powering the electric vehicle revolution through low cost and sustainable lithium, then it's a win-win for everybody. So that's my presentation for today. And I think I really appreciate this opportunity to tell the story of the geothermal industry and what Fervo is up to. And we truly believe that this is an innovation in a sector that can make 100% clean electricity future realistic. Thanks for your time.
Tim, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. I know I learned a ton, and I have a bunch of questions. We are starting to get questions in the Q&A, and we have a few minutes, so let's get to it. So first, my first question is really on the possibility, the potential for geothermal in the US, 120 gigawatts. But where is that located? Is that primarily in the West? So that if you're saying you get to 20% of the overall US power system, you really only impacts those grids, and then you need, if you want it to help in the East, you've got long distance transmission issues you need to deal with, or how does that all work if you're thinking just in terms of getting to that 20% of the US power sector?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can tell you there's currently 8 states in the US with active and installed geothermal capacity. 6 states in the continental US, all in the West, and then also Alaska and Hawaii. And so it's already a pretty broad resource. And because it's a resource that's dependent on the geology, new innovations, whenever they first get rolled out, are probably going to be concentrated in some of those same states. Several of the projects we're working on are in states with a track record of geothermal development with great geology. But whenever we start thinking longer term about getting to those really large numbers in the hundreds of gigawatts, there's plenty of opportunity to expand elsewhere. And so the drilling geothermal resource comes down to a cost question. question. And it's about how deep do you have to drill, how expensive is it to drill to get to a certain temperature and resource. And as we improve technology over time, there's no reason why we also couldn't start doing that in other locations like the Eastern United States or other places around the world. And so over the long term, with the right policy support and technology innovation, very realistic to consider doing geothermal all over the country. And then even in the short term, there's exciting things going on. I highlighted in the beginning that there's also the opportunity for direct use from geothermal. So if folks are interested in the East Coast and how they can participate in geothermal, I'd look at projects at places like West Virginia University and Cornell right now, which are planning on drilling even into lower temperature resources, but doing deep geothermal wells, because when you do combined heat and power, generate electricity for the campus and also provide heat for the campus heating system, all from a renewable energy resource, the economics become a lot more favorable because you're doing two things with that steam you're bringing to the surface, power and heat. And so in locations like that, where you can get benefits from both the power and heat, it's probably realistic. It's going to be realistic to do those projects even in the East Coast this decade. And if you want to learn more, please look at the Cornell and West Virginia University projects.
And that's great. And we have a really good follow-on question from Jason Bloom, who asks about cost and what the cost competition comparison is between geothermal and solar and wind, even if you're adding in lithium production, even if you're adding in combined heat and power. How far away are we from cost parity?
Yeah, so we're not going to get cost parity is the short answer. Solar and wind are so tremendously affordable in the places where there's good solar and wind resources that there's never ever going to be any energy that's cheaper than solar in sunny places. I see that. I think a lot of people see that. I think what we have to think about is what is the role that geothermal plays on the grid, and at what cost does it add enough value to be worth it? And that's why I point to that quote from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, who just did a big geothermal contract that talked about the value of geothermal. And so if you're trying to get to 20 or 30% renewable electricity, if you're in a sunny or windy place, that's what you're going to do. But if you're trying to get higher than that, you need a complement. For example, in California, solar plus 4 hours of battery storage, which is what they're starting to build now, is going to be great for driving emissions benefits, but it's never going to help with the winter and nighttime electricity that we need to clean up as well. And so if you look at, for example, the Lazard numbers on geothermal, they estimate it's anywhere from $60 to $100 a megawatt hour, whereas wind and solar could be in the 20 to 50 range, depending on where you are. And we're starting to see a lot of these contracts being done for geothermal actually in that range, in the $60 to $70 range, because people are recognizing the value of it. So I think for geothermal, if we can consistently deliver power in the, let's call it $60 plus or minus range, we're going to find a tremendous number of customers who are willing to buy at that price, because even though it's more expensive than wind and solar, it serves a different function on the grid.
Right, absolutely. We had a good question from Jack Kones, who asks, you gave the number 20% of U.S. Electricity generation, or 120 gigawatts. Can you get higher than that with more investment? Is there more resource that you can access if you invest more into the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you start measuring the technical potential of geothermal in the United States, it's actually measured in the thousands of gigawatts, not in the hundreds. And so there's no limitation from technical potential. It's all about cost and performance. So I use that number 20% and 120 gigawatts because that's in a fantastic DOE comprehensive report called the GeoVision study. But there's other works that have looked at if there's a more aggressive learning curve or cost curve or better technology R&D, what could that be? And there's been many reports that have found it could be more in the hundreds of gigawatts with the right technology curves. And so I think 120 I use that number because it's out of a fantastic, well-researched DOE report, and it's big enough to have a huge impact, but that's not a hard limit. There's truly thousands of gigawatts that we could develop in the United States. It's all about how quickly can we come down the cost curve and what is the performance of technology going to be.
Thanks. We're running out of time. I want to take one more question, which comes from Zach Strauss on Global Energy Center team, which is, are there any emissions issues from drilling? Do you have to worry about that? And if so, what can you capture those emissions?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, didn't have time to get into it in this presentation, but there's different types of surface technology for geothermal. Higher temperature typically used what's called flash geothermal, where you actually run the geothermal fluid through a turbine and then vent it to the atmosphere. And so there can be emissions associated with that. usually far, far less than coal or natural gas, but there can be emissions associated with that. But 95% of the geothermal that's been built since 2000 in the United States is what's called binary cycle geothermal technology, which actually uses a different working fluid and is completely closed loop at the surface. There's no emissions associated with it. And the vast majority of the growth in the pipeline in the US is all in this binary cycle technology. So new geothermal is emission-free in the operations phase. When you think about drilling and life cycle analysis, of course, there's other emissions in the carbon and the steel and the cement and the operations that go into that. We're working on things there too with some of our drilling partners on ideas like, can we electrify the drilling rig instead of running it off of diesel generators? And we're not interested just in the fact that this is an operationally carbon-free resource. At Fervo, we're trying to get every single piece of this process to be lower and lower from an emission standpoint. So electrifying things that used to be run on diesel is a big piece of that. Working with partners to develop lower carbon forms of cement and steel is going to be a big piece of that. So there's many things that need to be worked on to continue to improve this resource, but it's already in a fantastic place because all of the new geothermal that's being built is this binary cycle technology that's completely emission free.
Tim, thanks so much. Unfortunately, we are over time. We have a bunch more questions. We could have gone on for another half hour at least. Thank you all for tuning in today. And Tim, thank you so much for this really great presentation.
Thanks for the opportunity.
This was fantastic, and I hope we're able to bring you back. Be sure to follow Tim on Twitter at Tim Latimer. As I mentioned at the top, this is our last innovation stream for the year. We hosted 35 episodes since March. You can find them all on our website. We will have regular innovation stream programming resuming in February following the Global Energy Forum, January 19th through 21st. It's a really great event where global energy leaders come together to set the energy agenda for the year. We will have innovation stream programming embedded throughout this conference. So we really hope you tune in. More information is at acenergyforum.org. The Atlantic Council Global Energy Center has only one more event this year. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, we're hosting Masdar CEO Mohammed Al-Ramahi and Ambassador Carlos Pascual to discuss opportunities for US-UAE collaboration on global clean energy deployment. You can find out more on the Atlantic Council website. Thank you to everyone who helped put this event together today, including Lauren Holland, Roger Morales, Emma Smith, and Olga Kokova. And I want to give a particular thanks to Olga, who created Innovation Stream back in March and worked so hard putting each of these episodes together throughout the year. This presentation will be available on the Atlantic Council website, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So please do share it with your colleagues. We will see you next year, everybody. Happy holidays, happy new year. And Tim, thank you again. Really, really fantastic and interesting work you're doing.